a convicted felon has been connected to a 2005 crime against a 14-year-old girl in Albany County, New York. On the morning of May 13, 2005, 14-year-old Gretchen Gigi Perham left her home in Albany to walk to Hackett Middle School along Myrtle Avenue, as she did every school day. It was a quiet route through the city's Pine Hills neighborhood, but that morning, Gretchen never made it to class. Later that same day, a government worker from Albany's Department of General Services noticed something disturbing down an embankment near 100 Mount Hope Drive. Gretchen's body lay there, hidden from the busy street above. She had been fatally stabbed till her end. A violent end for a bright, promising student whose life should have been only beginning. The city was shaken. A young girl slain on her way to school. The case quickly became one of Albany's most heartbreaking and baffling crimes. The police immediately began a search for answers. The detectives combed the route Gretchen was known to walk, interviewed residents and commuters, and pieced together her last known steps. In the weeks and months that followed, the investigators identified suspects in other violent attacks from the same period. Incidents involving knife-point assaults on young women and girls in Albany and nearby Schenectady. Among those suspects was Darius Ashley, a man whose DNA would later link him to multiple indecent assaults and kidnappings in the area in 2005. At the time, however, the police did not have enough evidence to charge him in Gretchen's case. DNA tests from the crime scene were inconclusive, and though similarities in pattern and location raised suspicion, nothing could tie Ashley definitively to Gretchen's demise. As weeks turned to months, the investigation stalled and the case went cold. Gretchen's case became one of Albany's most painful cold cases, the kind that leaves family, friends, and detectives grasping for answers years after all leads have faded from the front pages. For nearly 20 years, Gretchen's case remained unsolved. Then, in December 2025, a breakthrough finally came. Albany County District Attorney Lee Kindlen announced on December 19, 2025, Darius Ashley has been charged with the 2005 stabbing of Gretchen Perham. Ashley was arraigned on a 6-count, sealed indictment in front of Acting State Supreme Court Justice Roger McDonough, charging him with 2 counts of slaying in the first degree, slaying in the second degree, kidnapping in the first degree, attempted indecent assault in the first degree, and abuse in the first degree. The case was reopened and re-examined using modern DNA technology and advanced forensic analysis techniques, tools that were far beyond what was available in 2005. Combined with collaborative work from Albany Police, the New York State Forensic Investigation Center, and other agencies, the old evidence could finally be tested in ways that provided clearer, more definitive results. 50-year-old Ashley, already incarcerated for 45 years at the Coxsackie Correctional Facility, pleaded not guilty to the new charges. If convicted, he could face life in prison on the charges in addition to the decades he is already serving. For the family and friends of Gretchen Perham, and for the community that watched a promising teen's life cut tragically short. The December 2025 indictment represents both a major breakthrough and a long-awaited step toward justice. It shows how patience, evolving forensic science, and sustained investigative pressure can break open even the oldest cold cases. A loving husband, father, and neighbor lost his life in his own home. It took decades for his perpetrator to be identified and for his loved ones to receive the closure they needed. On August 2, 1981, Samuel Allen, a 59-year-old World War II veteran and longtime resident of Loch Earn, Baltimore County in Maryland, settled in at his home on Liberty Road with his wife and daughter. Neighbors knew him as Mr. Fix-It, the kind of man who would lend a hand with repairs, share a story about the war, and quietly go about life. But that night would change everything. Shortly after 8 p.m., an armed intruder broke into the Allen family's house. He was methodical, wearing surgical gloves and carrying a blue cloth bag. The motive, at least initially, seemed to be robbery. He demanded money from Samuel's wife and daughter, who were in the kitchen when the man appeared. When Samuel walked into the room, the intruder shot him twice. The gunfire was sudden, dramatic, and devastating. In moments, a loving father and husband was lifeless, and his family was left in shock and grief. The suspect then demanded Samuel's wallet and took money before demanding more from his wife and daughter. The suspect realized he had misplaced the bag he was carrying, but he was unable to find it. The police arrived, but the case quickly went cold. The detectives recovered the blue bag and a shirt left behind by the perpetrator, but at the time, forensic DNA technology was not yet advanced enough to extract a usable profile. Despite interviews, evidence collection, and community tips, no suspect was ever identified. For decades, the family lived with unanswered questions about what had happened that night. For more than 4 decades, Samuel's case remained one of Baltimore County's most perplexing unresolved crimes. His daughter, Ann Allen, remembered the horror of the day and the cold, harsh look on her father's face in his final moments, memories that shaped her life and haunted her heart. She said, "When my dad walked through that kitchen door, he had gray eyes. I have never seen a colder, harsher look on anybody's face in my life. That is a terrible thing to remember your dad with that last look of just total anger." The blue bag and shirt stayed in evidence storage, quiet reminders of a brutal crime that defied resolution. Advances in forensic science gradually altered how cold cases were seen, but for the Allen family and investigators, hope faded with each passing year. By 2023, after more than 4 decades, cold case detectives in Baltimore County were reevaluating old evidence in hopes that modern DNA analysis could finally provide answers. After Ann reached out to the investigators asking for an update on her father's case, the detectives reviewed the old evidence and identified items that might yield DNA results with new technology. They sent the blue bag and related materials to DNA Laboratories International, where forensic experts were able to extract a CODIS-quality DNA profile from the decades-old evidence. In November 2024, that profile was entered into the combined DNA index system, and within weeks, the long-cold file had a match. The DNA belonged to Alan Bass, a 75-year-old man already serving 5 consecutive life sentences in Delaware for indecent assault, robbery, and kidnapping. The forensic link was confirmed in January 2025, more than 44 years after Samuel's life was ended. The Baltimore County Police have since issued an arrest warrant charging Bass with ending the life of Samuel. However, due to serious health issues and his incarceration in Delaware, the authorities have stated that Bass will not be extradited to Maryland at this time. If his health or custodial status changes, the prosecutors have said they are prepared to pursue the case to trial. For Ann, the breakthrough brought both relief and sorrow. She finally knows who is responsible for her father's end, a clarity that had eluded her for most of her life. She has even committed funds to help other cold cases receive DNA testing, hoping that other families might one day find answers too. Ann said, "To call somebody up and say, 'My dad was slain last night,' that is a terrible thing to have to say to somebody that you like and love, and there is nothing you can really do other than console the survivors. There is this big, horrible hole there now." Despite the hardship, Ann expressed satisfaction with knowing Bass was in prison. She said, "You are not going to be out where you can hurt anybody again, and that was my biggest concern. I do not want him hurting people." Samuel Allen's story is one of tragedy, persistence, and the slow but determined progress of justice. 27 years since a woman's life was ended, the police have arrested the man they believe is responsible for her end, but the case still has a mystery remaining. 20-year-old Selena Jo Dalton lived in her second-floor apartment on South Charles Street in Strasburg, Virginia, with her 10-week-old daughter, Allison Kathleen Dalton. Family members saw them together on the morning of July 27, 1998. Later that afternoon, at about 2:25 p.m., one of Selena's co-workers arrived at the apartment expecting a visit. Instead, she found a scene no one should ever face. Selena lay motionless on the couch, stabbed multiple times, her life stolen violently and senselessly inside her home. There was no weapon at the scene. There were no immediate signs of a struggle. The door showed no sign of forced entry, and neighbors reported hearing nothing unusual that morning. But Allison was gone. Her bottles, her tiny blankets, all missing. Her cradle was filled only with silence. Nothing explained where she could have disappeared to, and no trace of her was found. From the earliest hours of the investigation, the authorities focused on both Selena's life that was ended and Allison's mysterious disappearance. Virginia State Police and local law enforcement worked the case, combing the area for clues. The investigators announced that Selena was likely stabbed between 9:15 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. that morning. Allison's father, Daniel E. Pompel, who was not living with Selena and the baby at the time, told the police that he had gone to the apartment that morning and knocked on the door, got no answer, and left. In court documents, a witness told the police that she heard a disturbance inside Selena's apartment that afternoon, and then saw Daniel leaving the building with a bundle under his arm. The police said that he later claimed it was just a jacket. Selena had been pursuing child support and a paternity test, developments that, in the eyes of some, added possible motive and tension to the backdrop of the tragedy. They obtained a DNA sample from Pompel. Lab analysis did not exclude him as a possible contributor to DNA found on a mechanic's rag next to Selena's body, a rag the investigators believe was used to muffle her cries for help. Court documents also note Pompel has never asked about the investigation into his missing daughter. Despite early suspicion and the passage of time, no charges were filed in the 1990s and 2000s. Friends, neighbors, and even private investigators tried to develop leads. One witness years later recalled seeing a man placing a baby in a truck that morning, a detail law enforcement could neither fully confirm nor dismiss. The case grew cold as the community and investigators watched years turn into decades. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, Selena's case and Allison's disappearance remained one of Virginia's most heartbreaking cold cases. Flyers were circulated. Age-progressed images of Allison were issued, showing what she might look like years later, a young adult instead of a lost infant. But no breakthrough materialized. Selena's family continued to hope for justice and answers, and Allison's fate remained shrouded in pain and uncertainty. In September 2025, 27 years later, a major development finally came in the long-stalled case. Virginia State Police announced the arrest of 56-year-old Daniel Pompel of Culpeper, Virginia, charging him with first-degree slaying in connection with Selena's demise. Pompel was taken into custody without incident, and the authorities said the arrest marked a major step forward in the nearly three-decade investigation. Captain John D. Filippi of the Virginia State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigations described the breakthrough as overdue closure for Selena's family, reflecting years of painstaking work by the investigators and analysts. The Shenandoah County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office is prosecuting the case, and prosecutors say they are prepared to seek justice on behalf of Selena and her family. Even with an arrest made in 2025, one of the most painful unresolved elements remains. Allison Kathleen Dalton, aged 10 weeks when her mother was slain, remains missing till this day. If she were alive today, Allison would be in her mid-20s. A person with a life and identity that began in tragedy, but whose fate is still unknown. Law enforcement and advocacy organizations continue to pursue any credible lead that might explain her disappearance and, if possible, bring her home. The third and final suspect in the 1983 Kilgore, East Texas, KFC crimes has been identified through new DNA technology. On the night of September 23, 1983, in Kilgore, a group of young people gathered at a local Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurant. 3 employees finishing their shift and 2 friends waiting for them. It was a typical Friday night close to closing time. Nothing that would have drawn attention beyond the oil-tinged streets of the small town. But as the clock ticked past closing, the ordinary became something far darker. Unbeknownst to the victims, armed robbers burst into the restaurant. What began as a robbery quickly became an abduction. 5 people were forced into a waiting vehicle and driven away from the lights of the bustling main road toward a lonely, deserted stretch of rural East Texas. The next morning, on September 24th, a passerby found the bodies of 39-year-old Opie Hughes, 37-year-old Mary Tyler, 20-year-old Joey Johnson, 20-year-old David Maxwell, and 19-year-old Monty Landers lying on an isolated oil lease in Russ County. The scene was grim and haunting. All five had been shot in the back of the head, execution style. At least one victim, Opie Hughes, had also been indecently assaulted. There were no signs of struggle at the location. The case quickly became known nationwide as the chilling Kentucky Fried Chicken crimes. In the years that followed, law enforcement worked to piece together what had happened. For over 2 decades, the case eluded resolution. Then a breakthrough came, but only partially. By the mid-2000s, advances in DNA analysis finally bore fruit. The investigators matched DNA evidence from the KFC restaurant to 2 men, Romeo Pinkerton and Darnell Hartsfield. Both were eventually brought to justice. Pinkerton pleaded guilty in 2007, receiving multiple life sentences, and in 2008, Hartsfield was convicted and was also sentenced to life in prison. But there was a lingering mystery. DNA from indecent assault evidence, taken from clothing of one of the victims, did not match Pinkerton or Hartsfield, suggesting a third perpetrator whose identity remained unknown. The trail went cold again, haunting the investigators and families alike for another 2 decades. In 2023, the Texas Rangers reopened the inquiry, recognizing that new technology might finally solve the puzzle. Under the Assault Kit Initiative, a crucial piece of evidence was digitally scanned, isolated, and prepared for deeper analysis. It was not just looking for a match in a database. It was tracing family lines, shared genetic markers, and ancestral connections. The next year, in July 2024, the investigators sent that last piece of DNA evidence from clothing linked to Opie to Bode Technologies for advanced testing. By May 2025, genealogical analysis had narrowed possibilities down to 3 brothers living in East Texas. After months of painstaking work and cross-referencing ancestral trees, the detectives finally had a positive match in November 2025. The DNA belonged to Devin Riggs, a man who had passed away more than 10 years earlier. Riggs was identified as the third and final suspect in the KFC crimes. With that discovery, the authorities officially closed the cold case. Because Riggs had already been deceased for years, no arrests were made. But the confirmation brought long-sought answers to families who had spent decades waiting for closure. The resolution of this case did not come in a courtroom. There were no dramatic arrests, no final trial. Instead, it came in a laboratory through genetic genealogy, advanced DNA analysis, and years of persistent forensic work. For the families of the victims and for the community of East Texas, the identification of Devin Riggs as the final suspect offered something that had been missing for generations: certainty about what really happened on that night in September 1983. The decades-old mystery of a woman known as Naples Jane Doe has taken a significant turn. On February 16, 1975, the skeletal remains of an unidentified individual were found in the Collier County town of Naples, Florida. A man and woman were traveling north on Turner River Road when they saw a raccoon run across the road. They let their dog out to chase it when they discovered a human skull, which they reported to the authorities. The Collier County Sheriff's Office responded to the scene and began collecting evidence and investigating. In their search, the detectives found additional skeletal remains under bushes and tall grass. An anthropological assessment estimated that the remains belonged to a black female between 21 and 35 years old. The investigators also determined that the woman lost her life due to a gunshot wound, likely more than a year before she was found. Despite a lengthy investigation, the woman could not be identified, and she became known as Naples Jane Doe, 1975. Details of the case were entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System on April 7, 2008. In January 2024, the Collier County Sheriff's Office submitted forensic evidence to Othram to determine whether advanced DNA testing could help identify the woman. Othram scientists successfully developed a DNA extract from the evidence and used forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a comprehensive DNA profile. As is not uncommon, the genome-wide DNA analysis revised earlier anthropological estimates of biogeographical ancestry, determining that the woman was white and of European ancestry. Using this DNA profile and the updated ancestry information, Othram's in-house forensic genetic genealogy team conducted a genetic genealogy search and developed new investigative leads, which were returned to law enforcement. A follow-up investigation was conducted, leading the investigators to potential relatives of the woman. Reference DNA samples were collected from a relative and compared to the DNA profile of the unidentified woman. In December 2025, this investigation led to the positive identification of the woman, who is now known to be Darlene Schaab. Ari Fonte, a Collier County resident, expressed the community's mixed emotions about this development. Ari said, "I think it is hard for us as a community to just kind of digest this. You know what? I mean, it has been so long since she passed away, but, thank God, So, it is a good thing. It is a blessing." With Darlene's identity confirmed, the investigators are focusing on retracing her steps to piece together the last days of her life. Michael Vogan, Othram's Director of Law Enforcement Solutions, explained the importance of this process. Vogan said, "Now they are going to try to piece together the last few days of her life. Who was she with? Who had last seen her?" The community hopes this breakthrough will bring closure not only to the case, but also to Darlene's memory. Collier County resident Ana Salas shared her thoughts. She said, "Finally rest. She can finally be at peace, like this world is evil." The Collier County Sheriff's Office confirmed that the investigation remains active. Residents are hopeful yet aware of the challenges ahead. Anyone with information on this case is asked to please contact Southwest Florida Crime Stoppers, 1-800-7-808-477. A woman was brutally attacked by 3 men. Years went by without any answers, until decades later, when the suspects were identified. Yet, the case is still far from closed. It was a winter evening in early 2017 when a young woman in Novato, Marin County, in California, was attacked in what would become a criminal case that haunted the community for years. The victim, intoxicated and vulnerable, reported that she had been forcibly indecently assaulted by multiple men, an assault that shattered her sense of safety and began a police investigation that initially yielded no arrests. Biological and forensic evidence was collected at the time, but the technology available then could not tie the crime to any suspects. The case quieted, becoming one of many unsolved indecent assaults that linger in police files. For years, the case remained in the shadows of Novato Police Department records. Although the detectives continued to preserve evidence and followed every possible lead, the identities of those responsible were unknown. The victim had cooperated with law enforcement and undergone a medical exam, and biological samples had been collected. But in 2017, the available methods simply were not enough to name a suspect. Each passing year, without resolution, was another year of unanswered questions for the victim, her loved ones, and the community. But the persistence of the investigators and advances in technology would soon change the trajectory of this long-dormant file. By 2025, genetic and forensic science had taken remarkable leaps forward. Tools that could extract and analyze DNA with far greater precision were widely used to revisit cold cases. In Novato's 2017 assault case, the detectives decided to rerun the evidence with these new techniques. The results were decisive. The investigators were able to identify DNA profiles that matched individuals, men who, at the time of the original crime, had not been linked to the case. With this breakthrough, the detectives obtained arrest warrants for 3 suspects: 33-year-old Gilson O. De Leon Gramajo of San Rafael. He was arrested without incident in April 2025. The next suspect is 27-year-old Miguel Cruz Ravello, formerly of Novato and then living in Linwood, California. The authorities tracked him down in Southern California. With the assistance of the U.S. Marshals, he was taken into custody in May 2025, signaling the effectiveness of interagency cooperation in resolving long-cold cases. The last suspect is 30-year-old Fernando Mendoza Cruz, also a former Novato resident. Unlike the first two, Mendoza Cruz remains at large. Novato police believes that he left the United States and is living in Central America. An active warrant has been issued for his arrest, and the investigators continue to seek information on his whereabouts. All three suspects face charges of forcible indecent assault in concert, and sodomy. Two suspects are in custody, and one remains a wanted fugitive, illustrating that justice, even delayed, can still be pursued. For the victim and the community, these developments represent both a turning point in a long-standing investigation and a testament to the power of modern forensic science in bringing closure to crimes once believed unsolvable.